The Sikorsky Blackhawk has been a reliable warhorse for the U.S. Armed Forces. For over 35 years, it has been leading the charge into hostile territory, from the deserts of Iraq to the mountains of Afghanistan. The rhythmic pulse of its blades are both a signal to wounded American men and women that help is on the way, and a warning to enemy forces that trouble is on the horizon. After decades of upgrades, they remain some of the most sophisticated aircraft in the world. But is it possible to create an even more advanced machine using today's technology? What if the world's rotorcraft manufacturers started with a blank sheet and reimagined the helicopter from the ground up? In some ways, Vietnam was a helicopter war. Helicopters were key to moving troops and equipment in and out of hostile territory and airlifting the wounded to safety. They also fearlessly charged into battle, serving as spotters or leading the assaults themselves. The Bell UH-1 Huey was a vital member of America's stable of helicopters. Though designed as a transport, it would be pressed into many roles under the pressures of war, from rescue craft to flying gunship. Though it was a noble warrior, even with continuous upgrades, it was still largely based on technology from the 1950s, and by the late 60s, the U.S. Army was looking for an upgrade. Their quest for a replacement would lead to the birth of the Blackhawk.
The Blackhawk started out as a replacement for the Bell UH-1 Huey, which was widely used in the Vietnam War, in fact became iconic of the Vietnam War. And they took all that experience they had learned in the Vietnam War and they applied it to the requirement for what was then called the UTTAS or UTAS, which was Utility Tactical Transport Aviation System, in the early 70s.
3 of today's leading rotorcraft manufacturers took up the UTTAS challenge, designing the heir apparent to the Huey: Bell Helicopter, Boeing Vertol, and Sikorsky. After evaluating the proposals, Boeing and Sikorsky were given the go-ahead to construct prototypes. An intense competition between the two designs followed, with the Sikorsky Blackhawk ultimately winning the crown from the Huey. It wasn't long before the Blackhawk was building its own name as a legendary rotorcraft.
Really what made the Blackhawk the helicopter it is they took all that experience they'd learned in the Vietnam War about survivability, about crashworthiness, about the ability to carry a complete team of soldiers, not have to have several helicopters to carry them. And that really made the Blackhawk the utility machine it became.
The Blackhawk design has proven to be so robust that it's been adapted for the Navy as a Seahawk. It's also used around the world with many different countries. It's one of the most ubiquitous helicopter designs of the 20th century.
Extensive modifications have kept the Blackhawk at the forefront of technology, but it is still based on a 40-year-old design. As tough a warrior as the Blackhawk has been, after participating in 2 desert wars, there were questions about its suitability in future air battles. Has the Blackhawk finally reached the end of the line?
Even though they've gone from the UH-60L to the UH-60M and they've got bigger engines and a bigger rotor, they now find themselves operating in high temperatures and high altitudes, and they realize they don't have the performance they thought they had. Not only that, but they're being shot at again and they're crashing in sand and other problems. So they really come back from Iraq and Afghanistan realizing that the helicopter that's done them well for the last few decades is not going to do them well for the next few decades. So they start to lay out their plans for a replacement and to take all that experience they've learned from fighting in the desert and fighting in the mountains and apply it to a new helicopter that they think will be more suited to a future war that is not on a flat, grassy, green battlefield somewhere, but is going to be, they don't know where. And that's the point. They want a helicopter that will fight wherever they end up fighting.
The U.S. Army's FVL, or Future Vertical Lift program, was conceived to explore replacements for not only the Blackhawk, but for the rest of its aging stable of rotorcraft. The new breed of rotorcraft will not only use the latest breakthroughs in technology, they will also share common parts, making building and maintaining the fleet a more economical process. JMR, or the Joint Multi-Role Helicopter Program, is a competition to evaluate the technologies that will go into FVL helicopters.
So JMR is being led by the Army, but it's developing technologies in concert with the other services for the Future Vertical Lift program. In the competition, both Bell and Karem aircraft were looking at tiltrotors, and AVX and Sikorsky-Boeing were looking at a compound helicopter. Now, each company had a very different take on these approaches, but the key was high speed and long range.
The goal they've set is 230 knots. 230 knots is somewhere between 50 and 100% faster than a Blackhawk. A Blackhawk can do 170 knots. It never does 170 knots. The most it'll do is 150 knots. In hot and high, it'll only do 110 knots. So when you talk about 230 knots, you're talking about, in effect, twice as fast as the Blackhawk. And then you're talking about adding the range so they can go twice as far, twice as fast. So that's sort of like a threshold the Army said we want to look at. We want you, industry, to show us, the customer, that we can afford to go twice as fast, twice as far. That's what joint multi-role is all about. It does not mean that the Blackhawk replacement will fly twice as far, twice as fast as a Blackhawk, because the Army might still decide it can't afford to go twice as far, twice as fast.
The JMR competition saw two relative newcomers in the rotorcraft world take up the Army's challenge to go twice as far and fast. The AVX Aircraft Company and Karem Aircraft, a company founded by Abraham Karem, the father of the Predator drone.
So AVX and Karem both had really interesting approaches to this mission requirement. AVX was looking at more of a lower cost version of a high-speed compound, where Karem was looking at a really advanced tiltrotor, which they believed could hit much higher speeds and much longer range with what they call their optimal speed tiltrotor, OSTR.
Bell Helicopter, manufacturer of the V-22 Osprey, put forth a similar-looking rotorcraft for JMR. A byproduct of its tilt-rotor design is phenomenal power.
The Bell helicopter design, it's actually a 280 knot machine, which is much faster than the Army says it needs. But that speed actually falls out of the amount of power that it needs to take off and land vertically. So they put these two 5,000 shaft horsepower class engines on it to be able to take off and land vertically at the sort of 30,000 pound gross weight that the Army thinks this thing is going to weigh, which is about 10,000 pounds more than a Blackhawk. And then once you put those rotors down into cruise mode and it becomes a turboprop, you've got the power on board to go 280 knots, maybe even faster. So Bell uses that as an advantage when it does all of its tactical calculations about how many V-280s do you need to cover an area of responsibility, a battlefield. They've got this enormous speed advantage, and speed equals range in this case. Is how far can you go in a set amount of time. So to them, they use speed as an advantage.
The team of Sikorsky-Boeing have a head start in their Defiant, conceived for JMR, having created two advanced compound helicopter prototypes with their own funds.
Sikorsky-Bell, they've demonstrated with the X2 technology demonstrator that they can go to about 260 knots with this coaxial rotor, rigid coaxial rotor design. The Raider, which is the slightly bigger prototype they're building, they're aiming for about 240 knots. They think it will go faster than that, but they're aiming for about 240 knots, clean, with the weapons tucked away. 220 knots if they have the weapon doors open and the weapons deployed. JMR, they're saying 230 knots. They think it will probably go as fast as 270 knots when it's clean. These are fast machines.
The Army narrowed the field of competitors from 4 to 2. It's not that surprising that Bell Helicopter and Sikorsky-Boeing were the last two left standing. Though all teams had something unique to offer, the Army may have chosen to make a safer bet by siding with the larger companies with a longer proven track record. The great difference in their approaches allow the Army to evaluate two completely different systems.
The approach from Bell is a tiltrotor. The tiltrotor tends to be inherently better at cruise and more efficient for loiter because it has a wing. It can use wing-borne flight and use aerodynamics to keep the aircraft aloft rather than the helicopter's rotor pushing down. A compound helicopter, which it basically takes a helicopter and puts a pusher-propeller on it to make it go faster, and it can also go farther because it's not using the helicopter rotor to do both lift and forward thrust. And that's what Sikorsky and Boeing are looking at.
The origins of Sikorsky-Boeing's choice of design go back to the early 2000s, when Sikorsky was working on its own. The success of the Blackhawk enabled them to take helicopter technology in new directions.
Sikorsky was making a lot of money on building Blackhawks by the hundred for the Army. And they basically decided to start putting some of that profit into demonstrating technology for what they thought the next generation of rotorcraft would be. Now, they went off and they looked at all the possibilities. They looked at tiltrotor, they looked at variable diameter tiltrotor, they looked at other possibilities, and they came down on a design they'd actually done before.
In the early 70s, Sikorsky developed the XH-59. This was an experimental machine designed to test the advanced blade concept that is using two rigid contra-rotating rotors. Russian manufacturer Karmov had already produced several successful coaxial rotor designs. The concept had great potential, but it had a fatal flaw.
It's a very efficient hovering machine. If you think about it, the rotors get two chances to bite at the air. The first rotor pulls the air through, gets some lift, pushes its second rotor, pulls the air through, gets some more lift. Very efficient hovering machine, but slow because you're pushing two rotors through the air when you're going forward. So back in the late 60s, Sikorsky with Army and NASA set out to design a high-speed helicopter and demonstrate they could fly fast with this thing called the XH-59. So the XH-59 had coaxial rotors, but they were very close together. They were very stiff so they wouldn't bump into each other, but that allowed them to put them only inches apart, which dramatically reduced the drag of the rotor system when they pushed it forward because the rotors were close together. There wasn't a long, thin mast between the rotors. If you look at a Kamov design, several feet between the rotors. You push that forward, it generates a lot of drag. So they did this, they flew this, they did something around 260, 270 knots. But it was very complicated. It took two pilots to fly this helicopter, and it had four engines. It had two engines driving the rotors and two jet engines pushing it forward. So basically they decided that's not a good idea, and that went back on the shelf.
Though the XH-59 was overly complicated, might advances in technology make the basic concept the foundation for a new generation of helicopters?
In the early 2000s, there's Sikorsky saying, what's the next generation of rotorcraft? And they looked at all of the technology we've developed since. They looked at fly-by-wire, they looked at composites, they looked at integrated flight and propulsion control, they looked at vibration suppression, active vibration control. And they said, we can do that. We can do what we did with the XH-59, but we can do it with one engine, one pilot, and less vibration at twice the speed of a Blackhawk. So they set out to demonstrate with a thing called the X2 technology demonstrator.
So this uses a very closely spaced coaxial rotor, counter-rotating rotor, and then a pusher propeller. And they've proved with their X2 demonstrator that they could reach speeds of about 250 knots.
Very successful, done as a sort of a rapid prototype in a sort of skunkworks type operation. Small team, put it together, flew it. Having shown that, they then decided to put more of their money where their mouth was, and they decided to put $200 million of industry money into building two prototypes of a light tactical helicopter called the S-97 Raider.
The X2 and S-97 Raider were not developed specifically for the JMR competition. Originally, Sikorsky hoped to replace an aging scout helicopter, the Bell OH-58 Kiowa.
The S-97 currently is not part of the future vertical lift family of aircraft. It's a company-funded demonstrator that they would like to have purchased by the Army and other services as a light attack helicopter. The Army has had an outstanding requirement for decades now to develop a new attack scout helicopter. It was going to be Comanche, but then after billions of dollars and a couple decades of development, they ended up having to cancel that program.
Sikorsky hoped by building and flying the X-2 and S-97 Raider, the Army couldn't help but purchase their design for a new high-speed scout helicopter. It was a gamble that didn't work out as Sikorsky had planned.
Well, it went a bit awry. The Army sort of lost direction, really. And then eventually, when the budgets got tight, the Army decided it couldn't afford an armed scout helicopter. But Sikorsky just kept going, and it will build and it will fly the S-97, and they'll demonstrate it to the Army. And they're hoping that, you know, when budgets ease off and the Army realizes that it really does need a scout helicopter, they'll be there and ready when they come back. And there may be other requirements. The special operations folks have still got to replace their Little Bird helicopters, so they think there's something out there that eventually they may come. Meanwhile, the S-97 Raider is a good stepping stone towards joint multi-role and future vertical lift. It's significantly bigger than the original technology demonstrator, but it's significantly smaller than the joint multi-role. So joint multi-role takes that next step in size.
Sikorsky has a larger version of the S-97 in development, especially for the JMR contest, known as the Defiant. This is a medium-sized helicopter and a Blackhawk replacement. JMR will ultimately call for 4 sizes of helicopter to be produced to replace 25 helicopters currently in operation. Sikorsky's proven ability to scale its compound design could be a key advantage.
If you're in the rotorcraft, the biggest risk you face in designing a helicopter is scaling. Something works at one size, you then go and make it another size, and all of a sudden a whole bunch of problems turn up that you didn't realize. So if you're going to convince the Army that high speed is doable and affordable, you've got to get rid of all the areas of risk that you can. So scaling this up from the X-2 technology demonstrator to the S-97 Raider and now to the JMR TD allows Sikorsky to remove the risk of scaling.
Sikorsky boosted its odds of success by partnering with another giant in aviation and one of its great rivals.
Along the way, Sikorsky surprised us all by teaming with Boeing for this. Up till then, everybody had expected that Boeing would bid on its own. Not because they really had any incumbency on the Blackhawk. That was Sikorsky's business to win or lose. But because the Army was saying that eventually either the actual vehicle or certainly the technology that was in the Blackhawk replacement would be the basis for the Apache replacement. So Boeing was looking, saying, we're the incumbent on Apache, we've got to protect our turf, we've got to be in on JMR and FVL, because if we're not, and then the Army does decide to take the dynamic system or the entire airframe and repurpose it for the attack mission, we'll be out of the running. So Boeing was doing its own work, and Boeing actually was heading towards a tandem rotor design, because if you look at Boeing, they do a lot, Chinook, very successful. And the mission for the Blackhawk replacement drove Boeing to a tandem rotor. It was never going to that was not going to work, that was not going to be competitive. So eventually they decided to team. So now you have the company that's the incumbent on the Blackhawk and the company that's the incumbent on the Apache, which make up 60% of the Army's helicopter fleet, tied together on the potential replacement for all of those helicopters. They stayed with Sikorsky's X-2 configuration, but Boeing brings in its composite airframe technology, its integrated avionics technology, and other things like that to help Sikorsky make this design as competitive as they can.
Though Sikorsky and Boeing made a formidable team, they faced stiff opposition from legendary rotorcraft manufacturer Bell. Bell's V-280 Valor builds on many of the lessons learned from years of research in tiltrotor design.
Bell is describing the V-280 Valor as what they call a third-generation tiltrotor, which makes you go, what are the other 2 generations? Second generation clearly is the V-22 Osprey. The first generation is the XV-15, the original experimental tilt rotor that flew back in the 1970s, I think. That was an extremely successful aircraft.
The XV-15 proved the potential of the tiltrotor system. However, when creating the Osprey, designers had a tough challenge meeting the rigid set of new requirements set by the Marines.
One of the challenges with the V-22 Osprey is it had to fit on the Marine Corps' assault ships and to be able to taxi past the island. So that made the wingspan much shorter than it would have liked to have been. Then also having to rotate the wings and fold the blades, make it very compact for storage under the deck, made it more complicated.
So the V-22 ended up having the rotors are too small, the wings too small. It works, but it's a highly compromised tilt rotor. So when we come to the V-280, basically Bell goes back to the original intent of the tilt rotor and has an uncompromised design. Because this thing doesn't have to fold, it doesn't have to go on a deck, it doesn't have to go under a deck, they can make the rotor diameter what it should be, they can make the wingspan what it should be, they can take the forward sweep off that they put on the V-22, they can remove that and have a straight wing which is lighter. And then there's all sorts of other things they had to put into the V-22 so it could operate in a maritime environment that they just can remove. They don't need it for an Army helicopter.
Although Bell had a much freer hand in designing the V-280, there were still many nagging concerns about its tiltrotor design, the foremost being cost.
Bell, as it builds the Joint Multi-Role demonstrator, is really trying to prove one major point. And that major point is they can build a tilt rotor for the price of a conventional helicopter. If they can't prove they can build this aircraft at a reasonable price, they're dead in the water.
Bell's Osprey has become a vital part of U.S. Marine operations. Its success is strong evidence of the utility and versatility of the tilt rotor. But the V-280 Valor is being constructed for the Army and for a different type of mission altogether.
One of the big things I think Bell has to prove is whether or not a tilt rotor can actually do the mission that the Blackhawk does, which is flying into a firefight to drop off troops, pick up the wounded. You're not talking about the way the V-22 is necessarily operated, which is much more of a transport role.
The V-22 has really proven itself in the conflicts in Afghanistan and around the world with its ability to get in someplace long range, get there fast, hover, land, and get out. So it's really proven itself over the last 7 years it's been in operation.
The tactics that the Marines have evolved with the V-22 to make it survivable is that it stays fast for as long as it can. It basically flies in fast with the rotors down in turboprop mode, and then at the last minute they swing the rotors up into helicopter mode, they land, they load, unload, they take off, they put the turboprops down as quick as they can, and they accelerate out of the danger zone. Their exposure is very limited. That's how they've sort of got around the vulnerability that comes with the complexity of the tilt rotor. Bell has got to prove whether that applies to the Blackhawk mission. If it's going to be hovering more than the V-22 is, it's going to be exposed to fire more.
Ensuring the safety and survival of the crew to and from the target is a key part of any rotorcraft mission dossier. A byproduct of the V-280's tiltrotor design is an easy escape route.
Because they tilt only the rotors and not the engines, if you think about it, the V-22, they tilt the entire nacelle, so the hot exhaust comes close to the ground when they're in hover mode. In the V-280, they only tilt the rotor, and the engines stay fixed on the ends of the wing. One reason is simplicity. The second reason is so that they can unload the troops from the side doors and they can run sideways away from the aircraft, which is what they do with the Blackhawk. Whereas in the V-22, they can only go out the back door. Now, out the back door is fine, but you can't exit the aircraft as fast. You can't empty the aircraft or load his aircraft as fast if all of your troops have to go out the back door.
The V-280's side doors provide a faster means of escape than those of the V-22, but both aircraft are enticing targets for enemy fire.
It's hard to say whether a tiltrotor is more vulnerable than a conventional helicopter. It still has engines, gearboxes, rotors, all of which are things that can be shot at. It's really more a case of it's a physically larger signature to shoot at. And it's really this, can they minimize the amount of time that it's on the ground? And can they harden it? I mean, can they make sure that the rotor system can take a shot? On the V-22, they're able to minimize the exposure by the way they operate it. Where the Army may operate a tilt rotor would be very different. So it's going to be a different calculation, and that's going to be a key part of the demonstration.
The Army has a difficult decision to make, choosing between excellent proposals from Bell and Sikorsky-Boeing. They are hopeful that this new rotorcraft will be instilled with one quality absent from the Blackhawk: self-sufficiency.
The Army wants whatever it buys to replace the Blackhawk, it wants it to be able to self-deploy. At the moment, if you go abroad with a Blackhawk, you either have to hop from island to island, in effect, to get somewhere, or you have to pack them up, put them in a C5 Galaxy or a C-17 and fly them. And that takes an enormous amount of strategic airlift to move all of the Blackhawks needed to support an Army division or something like that. The goal the Army has set is they want to go 2,100 miles, which is the longest leg anywhere in the world. It's Hawaii to Los Angeles, I think. No refueling, all the fuel in extra tanks on board the helicopter. So basically, when an Army division deploys, the helicopters will go out on their own and will be waiting when they arrive. That simplifies it for the aircraft designers. They've got to put the fuel in there, but it means you don't have to fold this thing up to go inside an aircraft. You don't have to take the rotors off, make it fit. For Bell, that's a big advantage because that removes one of the big problems of the V-22 is the weight of all that folding mechanism is a huge weight for the V-22 and makes it very, very relatively inefficient for a tilt rotor. With a V-280, they can bolt the wing onto the fuselage. They can go for a very simple structure. It's all composite. The V-22 is composite, but it's what people call black aluminium. If you go in a V-22 and you look at the structure, it looks like it's aluminium. It has fasteners, it has frames, it has stringers, it has all things you'd expect in an aluminium structure, but it's actually carbon fiber. If you go into a V-280, they've gone to the what you can do with composites. Big self-supporting structures, some major frames, but not lots of frames, not lots of stringers. It's basically honeycomb stiffened structure for the wing and the fuselage, which is very light and very simple to produce.
The JMR competition is more of a marathon. Sikorsky, Boeing, and Bell are building rotorcraft to test and demonstrate technology only. The actual competition to build the Blackhawk replacement is to follow.
Everybody involved gets a second chance. Not only that, but on the current plans, the Army intends in the FVLM program to fund 2 competing Y-plane prototypes. So we could have a situation where Bell and Sikorsky-Boeing fly their demonstrators in 2017, go into another competition, and then fly Y-plane aircraft in 2025, and then down select to the aircraft that would be finally developed to replace the Blackhawk. So we're a long way from knowing who's won here. And it's important to remember that the Army has this second chance to choose, and also the Army has yet to decide it wants a fast helicopter. After all this, it could decide it wants a conventional helicopter because it's cheaper. After all this, the Army could decide to upgrade the Blackhawk again. It's done it from the A to the L and from the L to the M. There could be another generation of Blackhawk to come along. They're already planning to put a bigger engine in the Blackhawk, the ITEP engine. Sikorsky also has technology available to put an active rotor on the Blackhawk. I don't know whether in some dark room they've got some way of putting a coaxial rotor on a Blackhawk. We don't know. All we know is it's likely that the Army will upgrade the Blackhawk again, and it's possible they may go for a conventional helicopter to replace their fuel. They may not go for either of the fast rotorcraft.
With the Blackhawk replacement 20 years away, one has to question if the Army's timeline makes sense, and whether the technology developed in that time frame will be worth the wait.
2035 is a very long time from now, But some of that is we want to get this right. This is the first new development aircraft for the Army and most of the other services basically since the 1970s. So we want to see what is possible with the current state of the art, what we can prove, what would be possible for the next generation of aircraft.
Both Bell and Sikorsky-Boeing have excellent designs and proven track records constructing rotorcraft for the U.S. Armed Forces. But who holds the edge in the competition? Perhaps Sikorsky-Boeing's biggest advantage isn't technical. It's that they have the most to lose.
As we stand today, and you look at how the teams are lined up, we've got Bell on one side, we've got Sikorsky and Boeing on the other, and then we have the other two players, the small guys who got cut out this time around, the AVX aircraft and Karam aircraft, who may yet attract some bigger backers for the next stage. You have to say to yourself that it's Sikorsky and Boeing's competition to lose. They are the incumbents on the UH-60 Blackhawk utility helicopter and the H-64 Apache attack helicopter. It's their business to lose. But it's also a huge market. We're talking 3,000 helicopters plus all of the export, thousands of helicopters that export customers buy. Nobody's going to let them just walk in and take that. They're going to have to prove they can do it. They have a good technology base. They've flown the X2 technology demonstrator. They're building the S-97 radar. That configuration with the rigid coaxial rotors and the pusher-propeller on the back is going to be well proven by the time they fly their demonstrator.
On May 22, 2015, a test took place critical to the future of Sikorsky-Boeing's compound helicopter design. On that day, the S-97 Raider was to lift off for the very first time. Scientists and engineers gathered at the Sikorsky Development Flight Center in West Palm Beach, Florida, to scrutinize the event. They watched anxiously as pilots Bill Fell and Kevin Bredenbeck gingerly took the Raider into the air.
All right, just a few words here. So another first and a proud heritage of first for Sikorsky aircraft is now in the history books. A special thanks goes out to the entire Raider team, Kevin and I, for building this phenomenal machine.
A month after Sikorsky's triumph, it was announced that defense manufacturing giant Lockheed Martin was purchasing the company for $9 billion, perhaps bolstering its hand even more in the helicopter competition. Still, even with the success of the Raider and the added support of Lockheed Martin, victory is not a foregone conclusion. Sikorsky-Boeing still have much to prove to win the next phase of the competition, as do their main rivals, Bell.
Bell has a higher hill to climb. They can offer very high performance with the tilt rotor, but they have got to prove they can build that rotorcraft at an affordable price. They've also got to prove that it can do the Blackhawk mission. The V-22 does not spend a lot of time hovering. Blackhawk spends most of its time hanging around hovering. And so the other thing that Bell's got to prove is they can hang around and hover as efficiently as a rotorcraft. Sikorsky and Boeing don't have that problem. They know that they can hang around and hover efficiently. A coaxial rotor is a very efficient hovering machine. They've got to prove that that whole combination, the complexity of having two main rotors and a propeller on the back and integrating all that propulsion with flight control, they've got to prove to the Army that that's worthwhile. So they've got to prove that it's affordable. They've also got to prove there's some interesting ways you can fly the helicopter when you've got that propeller hanging out the back. You can do flat attitude approaches. You can hang on it, point the helicopter. They've got to prove that that means something in the utility mission. It isn't just nice to have, but you can actually do some real things. So they've got some things to prove as well. But as we stand today, you've got to look at what Sikorsky and Boeing have to lose and think that they are going to put everything into winning this. Bell, it's not as existential for Bell. It's not business they now have. If they lose this, they don't lose business they already have. If they win this, they win a market they don't have. But there is no doubt that for the US rotorcraft industry, this competition for FVL, Future Vertical Lift, is the one that's going to decide who dominates the industry for the next 50 years.
It will be a long time before the shape of the next generation of rotorcraft becomes clear. Much time and money is being invested by Sikorsky-Boeing and Bell to create new, faster helicopters, but the Army still might choose to go with a slower, cheaper design. Still, the knowledge gained constructing these awesome machines might still be applied to more conventional rotorcraft. As well, Caram Aircraft or AVX could make a return to the main stage and strike back with a contract-winning design of their own. All that we can be certain of is that the Blackhawk will soldier on until a new helicopter finally materializes, worthy to relieve it from duty.
He was a Russian by birth. He fled the motherland one step ahead of a Bolshevik firing squad. He designed and built the first four-engine airplane, the first airplane with an enclosed cockpit, and together with Charles Lindbergh, cooked up the seaplanes that made international airlines practical. Lindbergh called him the greatest aviation engineer he'd ever met.
He showed tremendous scientific talent at a very early age. By the time he was 11 or 12, he had read how to build small electrical motors, but he couldn't find any in Kiev at that time, so he actually began to take the bobbins from his mother's sewing machine and wrap them with wire, and he created his own electrical motors that he then powered with batteries by taking pickle jars and making batteries out of them.
For all his fixed-wing achievements, however, he is most closely identified with helicopters. For it was the helicopter company he founded relatively late in his life that turned his name into a household word. He is Igor Sikorsky, and he is a legend of air power. Igor Ivanovich Sikorsky was born May 25th, 1889 in Kiev, Russia. His father was a psychology professor and his mother a doctor, and together they nurtured their son's early interest in science.
His life was in a home in which he was felt very sheltered, very secure, very happy, in a home in which his father encouraged scientific research and encouraged daydreaming. He read what today we call science fiction books, primarily Jules Verne. He loved Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, 80 Days Around the World, Voyage to the Moon. But primarily, there was one book, Robur the Conqueror, also known as, prophetically, The Clipper of the Clouds. And it's very, not too well known here in America, but it's a book that describes a flying machine very accurately, actually a helicopter. Very, very accurately describes a helicopter some, obviously, 40, 50 years before it was ever flown.
He attended the Petrograd Naval College, but left in 1906 to study engineering in Paris, then the center of aviation in Europe. His time in France was a revelation. The Wright brothers were demonstrating their flyer outside Paris. The sky seemed filled with airships, and everywhere there were aeronauts and engineers collaborating on bigger and better flying machines. He returned to Russia and enrolled at the Mechanical Engineering College of the Kiev Polytechnical Institute.
He started pestering his parents to send him to Paris, because that was where the Wright brothers were flying. That's where, immediately after the Wright brothers' success, The Europeans tweaked their airplanes a little bit so as to pick up a little bit of the know-how that the Wrights had demonstrated, and flying exploded in France.
In 1909, armed with an engineering degree, he returned to Paris. He befriended the elite of aviation there and spent much of his time talking about his vision of an aircraft that could take off vertically, hover, move sideways, and set itself safely back down. The experienced pilots around him laughed at his plans. It was hard enough then getting an airplane to simply fly. Getting it to stand still without falling out of the air seemed laughable. Sikorsky announced to his doubting friends that he would return to Kiev and build a rotary wing aircraft, a helicopter. He bought 2 engines, 15 and 25 horsepower, and boarded a train east.
It's significant to me that his first aircraft and his second aircraft were both helicopters. They didn't fly. We know now that 15 and 25 horsepower is just too little to do it. But these were the first 2 aircraft he attempted. Very wisely, he then decided that he had to, in his words, temporarily postpone the helicopter.
He built a succession of small planes that clearly owe much of their inspiration to the Wright brothers. In only a few years, Sikorsky was one of the leading engineers in Russia. He was put in charge of the aviation subsidiary of the Baltic Railroad Car Works and went to work designing and building aircraft for the Tsar.
He was the first, actually, to come up with the idea of using multiple engines on an airplane. After he had one engine get caught with mosquitoes in the carburetor and the airplane went down, he realized that 2 engines are better than 1.
A multi-engine airplane was a radical idea. Other engineers thought it impossible. If the weight of the engines didn't keep the plane on the ground, they believed the forces and vibration of more than 1 engine would tear the plane apart in the sky.
During his early years, he developed multiple engine aircraft, 4-engine aircraft that were very, very large, which requires a great deal of skill as an engineer to be able to produce a large aircraft that everything works correctly, especially at the time of the type of materials they had to work with. It was quite an achievement.
Sikorsky continued on, however, and the result was a 4-engine behemoth with an almost unfathomable 89-foot wingspan. Called simply the Grand, when it flew in 1913, it made Sikorsky into a Russian hero.
The Grand was a unique experiment in trying to convince the world that a large 4-engine aircraft was possible. He wanted to build this airplane because he wanted to prove that an aircraft had to have 2 characteristics. The Grand was designed to demonstrate 2 critical elements. A, the element of being able to maintain altitude and continue flight if one engine failed on you. And the second, equally important element, that airplane had to be able to lose any one of its engines, inboard, outboard, any one side or the other, and remain controllable. He, with a twinkle in his eye, would talk about the Grand and say that it was a very unique aircraft. It took off at 65 kilometers an hour, it cruised at 65 kilometers an hour, and it stalled at 65 kilometers an hour. But other than that, it was a highly efficient airplane.
His next plane, the Ilya Muromets, was even bigger and became the main bomber of the Russian Imperial Air Force in World War I. Designing aircraft had made Sikorsky wealthy. He was invited to meet several times with the Tsar, and there was talk that he might be knighted for his work.
When the revolution started, that very fact that he had been recognized by the Tsar and had been rewarded by the Tsar made him an enemy of the working class and made him a target of the Soviet, or the Bolshevik at that time, hit squads.
A committed individualist, Sikorsky could not live under communism and decided to leave. His wife chose to stay and refused to let their daughter travel with him. He left penniless and broken-hearted, a refugee bound for Paris, but destined for the United States. After fleeing the Russian Revolution, Igor Sikorsky tried to find work in Paris.
The World War I was still on in 1917, and so he went to France, where the French aviation authorities knew him very well because that he had purchased during the war a large number of French as well as British engines for his 4-engine bombers. They commissioned him to build a large bomber for them.
But when World War I ended, so did the French commitment to aviation. And with no other option, he sailed for the United States.
My father then spent some weeks studying the situation and then decided that he would go to the United States because he felt that this very, in his words, this very great and wonderful country was probably the only nation which would accept a penniless immigrant with the dream to start building airplanes again.
Though famous in his own country, he was unknown in the United States. He arrived in an unwelcome wave of refugees. There were no opportunities for him in aviation. With World War I ended, no one was building new aircraft. The glut of military surplus biplanes supplied the embryonic commercial aviation business with all the planes it could handle. With nothing else to do, Sikorsky tutored Russian immigrants on New York's Lower East Side. He lectured on math and astronomy and aviation. He lived in poverty, but never let it break his spirit. And as time passed, he built up a following in the large community of Russian refugees. His optimism seemed boundless, and his vision of the amazing future of flight made what were really little more than daydreams seem real.
For a lot of the Russian immigrants, he was something of a hero, something to aspire to, having come here as an immigrant and having all these dreams that he was so anxious to fulfill.
In the early 1920s, Sikorsky resigned himself to the fact that he would never again get to design and build aircraft. Then, in 1923, a group of Russian emigres approached Sikorsky. They had a small amount of money and were willing to work. Would Sikorsky do them the honor of helping them design and build an airplane? Sikorsky set up operations on a chicken farm next to Roosevelt Airport on Long Island. There, he and his small band of Russian immigrants went to work. There was never enough money for payroll and barely enough for materials. No matter, Sikorsky and his Russians worked through night after night on a large twin-engine airplane Sikorsky had designed. And then, with the plane partially built and a desperate need for high-powered engines to make it fly, Sikorsky and his Russians ran out of money. It seemed as if their dream of flight was going to die.
A gentleman drove up, stepped out of his chauffeur-driven limousine, walked around inspecting the airplane, which was being built in the open. The gentleman stopped, started a conversation with Igor Sikorsky, and Igor Sikorsky eventually tells the story that this gentleman sat down and wrote out a check for $5,000, handed it to my father and said, "I believe in you, I trust you, pay me back when you can, go, start building your airplanes." The man's name was Sergei Rachmaninoff, and it was this great pianist and composer who gave Dad his start in America.
The plane Rachmaninoff's contribution made possible was the S-29A, a twin-engine, all-metal transport that was the forerunner of the modern airliner.
It gave him the intellectual freedom and the financial wherewithal to produce the aircraft that a visionary could see, and in the process produce very successful aircraft.
He followed with other designs and started building a reputation as a visionary. In 1930, he gave a newspaper interview in which he described a glimmering future of sleek metal aircraft carrying hundreds of passengers from continent to continent.
Igor Sikorsky predicted in this newspaper interview that New York would be the center and the hub of one of the most busy airline services. Giant all-metal airplanes, sleek all-metal airplanes carrying hundreds of passengers would be taking off every hour on the hour for the far corners of the world.
At a time when most aircraft were still made of fabric stretched over a wooden frame, he talked about pressurized cabins and jet engines as if they were something he had already tested.
To get metaphysical, my father also believed very strongly in intuition, in a sixth sense, which sometimes came to you in a flash in the middle of the night. Sometimes it arrived very, very slowly after you'd been chewing on a problem for a while.
He had his first big hit with the S-38, a flying boat that Pan American Airways used to open new commercial aviation routes to Central and South America. That success brought in other investors, including United Aviation, which was then a major producer of aircraft. And for the first time since leaving Russia, Sikorsky had the money for large-scale design and construction of aircraft. Though still fascinated with helicopters, his business grew because of his success designing fixed-wing aircraft. Among those who visited the Sikorsky factory was Charles Lindbergh, just returned from his flight to Paris. Sikorsky and Lindbergh found in each other kindred spirits. They were both intellectually restless, at the same time cerebral and instinctive. Both had clear visions of aviation as an everyday experience, pioneers who longed to make their field of endeavor commonplace to the point of being boring. Even their differences seemed complementary. Lindbergh looked at aviation from the point of view of a pilot. He wanted to open the world to aviation, and he traveled ceaselessly, charting routes for others to follow. Sikorsky, on the other hand, saw aviation as an engineering problem. To follow the routes Lindbergh was plotting, a passenger plane would have to have a certain range, be able to reach a certain altitude, and carry a certain amount of fuel.
He'd spent a lot of time in the dark listening to music, thinking, and he felt that he could almost see into the future, so to speak. Again, he was a very mystical, very spiritual man, to see what the needs would be, where his ideas could be applied to the betterment of mankind. And I think his particular genius came in his ability to take technology and apply it to the human need.
Lindbergh, Sikorsky believed, was the greatest pilot in the world. Sikorsky, Lindbergh said, was the most gifted aircraft designer he had ever met.
Dad had a great deal of respect for Lindbergh because there's no doubt about it, man knew a great deal about aviation. And in fact, it was this gentle teamwork between Lindbergh and Sikorsky, the mutual respect that they had for each other, that was absolutely wonderful to see in action.
The first plane they collaborated on was the S-40, a flying boat larger and more dependable than any other. Lindbergh was working for Pan American Airways, setting up airmail service to the Caribbean, which was then a sea of islands without landing strips. Tying them together with aircraft posed problems that seemed even to Lindbergh nearly insoluble.
I was growing up at that time. I was a small kid, but I was privileged once in a while to sit in a corner of the dining room when these two giants would discuss the growth of aviation, the need for higher speeds, the inevitability of higher wing loadings, and yet the improvement of our knowledge of aerodynamics, which would still keep landing speeds down while the cruising speeds would go up. Now, it was a wonderful way to grow up because you may have gotten a formal education in high school and in college, but if you were an aviation buff, as I was, those evenings listening to Charles Lindbergh and Igor Sikorsky were the greatest aeronautical academy that anybody could dream of having.
It was the beginning of one of his most productive periods. Working together with Pan Am and Lindbergh, he designed a series of amphibious aircraft that formed the famed Pan Am Clipper fleet. He had in his career played a key role in two separate revolutions. In Russia, he had pioneered multi-engine aircraft, which became the first dependable air transports and long-range bombers. In the United States, he had designed the flying boats that had made intercontinental air travel possible. The Pan Am Clippers shrank the world, putting every place in the world within a couple of days' travel of every place else. So, with his company doing well and his reputation secure, he returned to his first love. In the middle 1930s, Igor Sikorsky dug out 30 years of notes and sketches, dusted off a handful of patents, and went to work on the helicopter. Before Igor Sikorsky got seriously into helicopter development, there had been a number of more or less successful experiments in vertical flight. Some could fly but not hover, and others couldn't fly at all. Overcoming the torque of a spinning main rotor and still being able to maneuver was such a big problem that it led many to believe that a practical helicopter would never be developed. Sikorsky, however, believed passionately that the helicopter would work.
He was not interested just in engineering and technology. The primary reason he developed with the helicopter was to rescue people, to save people's lives.
As he worked and reworked the design of his helicopter, Sikorsky said over and over that if a person was in danger, an airplane could fly over and throw flowers to him. But a helicopter could come in and perform a rescue. Working at his Stratford, Connecticut factory, he and his team, still made up largely of Russian immigrants, built the VS-300. Ungainly by modern standards, the 300 was little more than a framework to support the engine and rotor. On September 14, 1939, Sikorsky sat down in the VS-300's pilot seat for its first flight.
When he climbed into this machine for the first time, he said it was a beautiful chance to relive one's life all over again, to design a new type of flying machine without quite knowing how to design it, build it without quite knowing how to build it, and then you climbed aboard and you opened up the throttle and you tried to teach yourself to fly at the same time that you were the test pilot in charge of the helicopter.
Sikorsky carefully, slowly lifted off, learning to fly the helicopter as it rose. He went only a few feet off the ground, hesitated a few seconds in midair, and settled gently back to Earth. The world had its first working, practical helicopter. While Sikorsky thought the helicopter's future lay in rescue, the first American military man to get a look at the VS-300 instantly recognized its battlefield potential.
People began to realize the idea that we can move large numbers of troops, we can attach weapons to these, and so the United States Army, for example, their aircraft, their helicopters, and these are very, very important for maneuver of the Army units.
In 1942, while looking for aircraft that could be developed to fight German U-boats in the North Atlantic, two Coast Guard officers paid Sikorsky a visit. They watched in awe as Sikorsky lifted 25 feet off the ground, lifting a second man below on a suspended rope ladder. In their report on the test, they said Sikorsky's machine had many advantages over the blimps the Navy had developed for anti-submarine warfare. They recommended the Coast Guard buy 3 or 4 for testing, but the Navy balked at the $250,000 price tag. When the officers pointed out that helicopters could serve a search and rescue function, the War Department replied that the Navy was not interested in life-saving. They just wanted to get on with the business of killing the enemy.
I think he was aware that inevitably, sometime sooner or later, it would be used as a military instrument of war. But that he said, was not the fault of the helicopter, because for every single person that it killed, he insisted quite logically that it probably saved 100.
For the remainder of his life, Sikorsky designed and built helicopters. From the R-4, the first mass-produced helicopter, to the UH-60 Blackhawk, the machines he and his company designed and built rewrote the rules of aviation, of warfare, and of search and rescue.
When everyone talks about Igor Sikorsky today, it is the helicopter that he is remembered at. And that's, I think, justifiably so. It is the last and, in many respects, the most important piece of equipment that my father invented and left for mankind. When I asked him about it, he said that he had a number of favorite aircraft. And obviously the Grand, the first prototype 4-engine aircraft, was one. The flying boats were another one. But I believe also he himself felt proudest of his achievements in designing the helicopter.
It is impossible to imagine what fighting in combat is like unless we have actually done that. 2 more of our country's heroes are with us today to share their experiences fighting in 7, that is 7, different conflicts from Vietnam to Iraq and Afghanistan. Jim Lawrence is a retired Marine captain. He's also a retired naval aviator, rank of commander. And he is a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel. Only he can explain all of that. He has over 35,000 flight hours, 7,700 in single-seat aircraft, 3 combat tours flying over Laos, North and South Vietnam, then Bosnia and Afghanistan. His first carrier landing, or trap as naval aviators call it, was flying the Navy T-2B jet trainer at age 19. Among his aircraft, the Navy F-8 Crusader, the A-4 Skyhawk, and the O-1 Bird Dog, all in combat before he turned 22. Then came the A-7 Corsair and the A-10 Warthog over Bosnia, and the King Air 350 over Afghanistan. He retired from Western and Delta as a captain after 35 years with the airlines. Michael Durant is a retired Chief Warrant Officer 4 Army aviator. Over 22 years active duty, he flew 150 medevac missions in the UH-1 Huey and UH-60 helicopters. Then air assault missions assigned to the 101st Aviation Battalion at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. He participated in combat Operation Prime Chance to protect American-flagged oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. Operation Just Cause, the U.S. invasion of Panama, and Operation Desert Storm, where he was the first helicopter pilot to engage a Scud missile launcher. Flying with the 160th Special Operations Regiment, SOAR, on October 3rd, 1993, he was the second Blackhawk helicopter to crash in Mogadishu, Somalia, where he was seriously injured and taken prisoner. He was released after 11 days in captivity. His 3 crewmates and 2 Army snipers were killed trying to fight off hostile Somalis. Durant retired with 3,700 flight hours, 1,400 of those hours on night goggles. He wrote a New York Times bestseller, In the Company of Heroes, about his career and his experiences in Somalia. In 2008, Durant was inducted into the Army Aviation Hall of Fame. Both gentlemen are highly decorated. Jim Lawrence, Distinguished Flying Cross, 36 Air Medals, 2 Single Mission Medals, and many, many more. Michael Durant, Distinguished Flying Cross with Oak Leaf Cluster, Bronze Star with V Device, the Purple Heart, 3 Air Medals, the POW Medal, and many, many more. Thank you all very much. Please welcome Jim Lawrence and Michael Durant. Jim.
Sir?
Oh, God, don't call me sir. Darn. You just heard it. You're a Marine, and I'd heard, once you're a Marine, you're always a Marine, but you retired from the Marines and became a naval officer and aviator. And then you retired from the Marine Corps and became an Air Force pilot. Now, what was this all about, Jim?
I just couldn't keep a steady job.
Michael, he missed Army aviation. I mean, how hurt are your feelings?
It's not over yet. I mean, maybe he's saving the best for last.
Right. Jim, start us off, would you? In all your flying, start with, what, the A4 in Vietnam?
Yes, sir. We had... when I got my wings, we went overseas, deployed to Chu Lai, Vietnam, and I was assigned, I was a young lieutenant, 21 years old, and I was assigned to VMA 211 out of Chu Lai and was flying combat missions there, and then they asked for volunteers to go to the Bird Dog as a FAC, and being 21, I figured, what could possibly go wrong? And so I volunteered to go be a FAC. So that's how.
So you went from flying A4 at 400 or 500 miles an hour to flying a Bird Dog at, what, 90 miles an hour?
On a good day.
On a good day? So what does that really say about you? I mean...
That I'm a really slow learner.
Tell me about the Bird Dog missions.
The Bird Dog mission was probably one of the more rewarding because we were working with our ground troops in heavy contact, as Michael certainly understands. And our mission in the Bird Dog was to find the bad guys, well, depending on which side you're on, and which was usually not very difficult. And we would work with our ground troops. We would then identify the targets, bring in fighters. Because we were fighter pilots, we knew the capabilities of the aircraft. We knew the ordnance because we had been doing it. And I love it. Anyway, then we would control the tactical fighters. We controlled F-4 Phantoms, A-4 Skyhawks, F-100s, and we controlled naval gunfire off of the battleship New Jersey. I controlled her about a dozen times, and the Newport News cruiser, and then Marine and Army artillery. So,
how often were you shot at? I mean, how dangerous is that flying at that altitude?
Well, it got pretty sporting every now and then, but probably I would say 90% of our missions we took ground fire. In fact, the names on the side of my airplane are my squadron mates who were shot down and killed in action while we were flying the Bird Dog. We could only fly it for 6 months because the loss rate was so high. So that's as memorial to my buddies that didn't come home.
Yeah. Michael, helicopters, of course, since Vietnam. How significant, since Vietnam especially, have helicopters become?
Well, I think, I haven't served in Afghanistan or Iraq in these recent conflicts, but what I understand about the utilization of helicopters in general is they're almost the Jeeps of the modern battlefield. I mean, you're moving stuff, you're hauling troops, there's so many things that you can do with them. And it's, when there's an IED threat, which there is on the ground, obviously, it's often considered a safer way to move people and equipment and things around. Now, who would ever thought we'd get to the point where we think flying helicopters around is safer than riding on roads? But it is, and I think if you took helicopters away from the commanders on the battlefield today, you'd really limit their ability to do what they need to do.
Now, you're Huey flying in medevac. Where were your medevac missions, and how dangerous were they?
Well, I've always said that being assigned to medevac as my first assignment out of flight school was the greatest thing that could have happened, although it didn't feel that way at the time. A lot of what ends up in our lives, happening in our lives, is luck and chance and good fortune. So I didn't really want to go do that, but that was the assignment. And when I got there, I realized it was a fantastic assignment because in medevac, I had to progress to pilot and command status pretty fast. I did it like in 3 months. If I'd have gone to what we would call a lift battalion or a utility battalion, I probably wouldn't have been pushed that fast forward, because when you're in medevac, you're flying by yourself all the time. And although it's not combat, it's usually a real world mission, so there are potentially lives on the line, so there's a lot of decision making, a lot of autonomy. And for a new pilot, that's the kind of stuff you got to get exposed to, because you start to learn. I mean, you're gonna make mistakes, and that's how you learn. You learn from making them.
How did you come to helicopters as opposed to wanting to fly fixed wing or something else?
Yeah, it's the first aircraft that I really got to go spend any time in was a helicopter, and I just thought that it was the coolest thing in the world. I was 14 years old. I'll never forget that first flight, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do in my life? Am I going to go, work in the mill? I come from a mill town. Nothing against it, but is that my career aspiration, or do I want to do what this guy's doing over here that seems to be having a blast, and he's getting paid to do it? So from that moment on, I really set that as my target.
And where were you flying medevac missions?
In Korea. My medevac assignment was in Korea, and I enjoyed it so much I extended. Normally we're there for a year, but I extended and spent 20 months there.
And what were your experiences there?
Challenging, but very rewarding. It's pretty difficult terrain for helicopters. A lot of mountains, a lot of wires. Seoul's a big city. You got the DMZ. So there's a lot of things that you're dealing with there, and don't have a lot of time to plan. It's a medevac mission, so the phone rings, you got to go, and you're out the door. So as I said, it's a really good place to develop those decision-making skills and aviation skills.
Physically, when the bell rings, as you just suggested, how long does it take to get a helicopter off the ground? What's the process of being able to actually fly? How long does it take?
I mean, you can start it in about 3 minutes if you really want to. Now, that's oddly enough, legacy aircraft are easier to start than current generation aircraft, because in some of the newer aircraft, you got to get things spun up and get alignments to occur, you know, with the navigation systems and all that. But in these older aircraft, push the button, advance the throttles, and go. You know, doesn't mean you haven't done all the procedures you're supposed to do, but you do those ahead of time,
right,
so you can get the aircraft off the ground in just a few minutes.
So, Jim, Bosnia, the A-10. So you've already flown a bunch of airplanes and you move into the A-10. Describe what it's like to fly that airplane and why is it effective?
The A-10 is truly amazing airplane in its own self. It's the premier close air support aircraft. Let me just regress for a second and say something about the dust-off Army medevac guys. When I was flying the Bird Dog and flying the A-4 in Vietnam, the Army dust-off medevac helicopter guys were some of the absolute bravest, most amazing guys that I have ever supported and watched in action. These guys would go in and pull out our wounded, Marines or Army, it didn't matter. But when dust-off got the call, they went in and they did it. And it was just utterly amazing, Michael, what you guys did. And
well, those were my predecessors, but it sort of set the culture for medevac and certainly all Army aviation.
Absolutely. The dust-off guys, well, there's children and ladies here, but they carried certain parts of their anatomy around in a wheelbarrow.
I might add that the last few years, retired Army General Pat Brady, Medal of Honor recipient, and Pat was supposed to have been with us today, but his wife has some health issues. But our hope is that General Brady will be back with us next year.
Yeah, I'm sorry now, back to your original question about the A-10.
Fine.
The A-10 is a very unique aircraft. If you listen to any of the grunts, grunts being infantry, guys on the ground, they love the A-10. It can carry a lot of ordnance, and it can stay on station a long time. It can put pressure on the target over and over again. And then with the 30-millimeter cannon that fires 70 rounds a second, we carried 1,142 bullets. And it is just the premier close air support aircraft. I know they're trying to replace it with the F-35, but it's just not the same.
Yeah, what's your view of that? And it's in the media all the time about those who want to keep the airplane and those who want to get rid of it.
Well, those that want to keep the airplane know what they're doing. And you talk to the infantry guys, and the only airplane, not to say that the F-16 and the F-18 aren't great airplanes, because they are. I mean, they're fantastic airplanes in their own way. But the A-10, the Warthog, is a unique aircraft specifically designed for close air support, and it can stay longer, carry more. So it's just, they're making a big mistake. The airplane's been upgraded in the cockpit to what's called a Charlie model. It's got a glass cockpit now. It's got a lightning pod so that you can designate your smart weapons on your own rather than have another aircraft do it for you. But it's just it needs to be there.
So your early missions in Bosnia, tell us about the beginning for you of A-10 flying in Bosnia.
Well, when we first got there, it was Operation Deny Flight. So we were flying patrols over Bosnia just basically every day. We'd fly every day over Bosnia, working with the ground troops from all over the world. And then when the Serbs bombed and shelled Sarajevo marketplace in August of '95, that's when NATO finally got the courage to do something, and we turned into Operation Deliberate Force, which we then started flying airstrikes against the Serbs. And it was really interesting. I led one of our first strike that morning in August, and we took off at 2 o'clock in the morning after about 30 minutes of sleep, and found our tankers in a pitch black night. Nothing like the sound around. Found our tankers, and then we went into our orbit points off of Croatia. And about that time, Magic, who was the AWACS aircraft, called me. My call sign was Mako 27. Said, Mako 27, go green. And I went green, which is secure radio. And they said, you're authorized weapons free, which meant we were going to war, basically, is what it meant. And of course, I authenticated them just to make sure that it wasn't somebody trying to fool us. And then I came back onto our tactical frequency, and I told our flight, I said, proceed you to targets as brief, God be with us, and off we went.
How often were you shot at? What happened that day when that first mission?
Well, that was a pretty interesting morning. My target was the largest armored repair facility in all of the Balkans near Sarajevo in a town called Hadici. And my wingman, Dan Peabody, he was an attorney, so we called him Counselor. So Counselor and I proceeded over to the target. I checked in with the French Foreign Legion, Disney 6, who was the guys on the ground. And Disney authenticated me, and I authenticated him, and it was a clear day. I had the target, and I rolled in on the target, and from about 28,000. And I was
still dark, or are you in daytime now?
It was daytime. It was right at dawn, actually. It was just after dawn. And I rolled in, I locked up the tread assembly building, which was my target. And just as I started to squeeze the Maverick off, and the Maverick, for those of you who don't know, it's a infrared guided missile. We could flip a switch on the inboard throttle of the A-10, and you'd get a video picture would come up, and you saw what the missile saw. So you could then slew and lock onto your target, which I did. And I'm just getting ready to release, and Counselor starts yelling at me, no mad, Sam, break. And Dan had never seen a real Sam. He didn't have any combat time. So normally when you tell somebody that, you tell them which way to break. But Dan was a little bit tense at that point. And so it was just an instantaneous decision for me. And I broke hard right. And fortunately, it was the right way. And I picked up the missile as it was coming up. And I was able to defeat that missile. And then before the morning was over, I had 6 SAMs fired at me and 4 anti-aircraft sites. 3 of the anti-aircraft sites were silenced by British artillery off of Mount Igman. And then I took on this one anti-aircraft site that was out of their range. And it was like the gunfight at the OK Corral. I had tracers going by my canopy and flak going off. And I turned my gun on, and I started engaging him from about 9,000 feet away. And fortunately, I hit him before he hit me. And then I decided, to get the hell out of town.
How many more missions did you fly in the Warthog?
In Bosnia, I flew another 42 missions.
Right. Michael, Mogadishu, what were we doing there? Mission.
So initially, it was actually a humanitarian relief operation. The Somali people.
What year was this? Sorry. What year?
In '92, we entered Somalia, just before Christmas of '92, and it was really just provide security for relief organizations. I was not personally involved at that point. And then over about a 6-month period, the mission started to expand in scope and essentially became a manhunt. And that's when we got involved, because that's kind of one of the missions that we usually take on within the special operations world. So our rehearsals and our focus was on being able to go into the city and capture, as it turned out, a list of 50 individuals that the UN wanted apprehended.
What is the crew of, now this is your helicopter, right? Or an updated version of it?
It's not mine, but...
Well...
But I do have one, but it's not a Mike model.
But the Blackhawk, how many on the crew? And
typically in the Army, it's a crew of 4. It doesn't have to be. I mean, you can just fly with 2 pilots if you want to. But typically, for tactical missions, a crew of 4, 2 pilots, 2 crew chiefs.
So what happened that day?
So it's the 7th mission that day you're referring to, I'm assuming, is Blackhawk down, October 3rd, 93. Right. The mission that day is to go capture 2 top 10 personnel. We'd already captured the number 2 guy, and we captured 25 others. So we had 26 already in prison in a 6-week period. So it had gone pretty well. We hadn't lost any people and hadn't lost any aircraft. But this particular day we knew was going to be different. There was 4 things about it. One, worst part of town. If you put a pin on the map the place you do not want to go in Mogadishu. That's where the mission was. Number 2 is daytime, so we can't use our night vision technology, and we can't really hide as well, obviously, in the dark. Number 3, we've done it 6 times before, so they're starting to learn what our tactics are, and they're doing things to be more effective against that. And the last one is you can't land Blackhawks in the street. This part of the city, the streets are too narrow. So it's okay going in because we can fast rope people in. Means you throw ropes out the side and they slide down the ropes. Easy, in fact, it's probably better than landing. The issue comes with extraction. So we can't air land the Blackhawks, which means we've either got to get everybody off rooftops, which is not a good idea because rooftop extraction, you've been on the target now for probably a half an hour, attracting a lot of attention. You come in and land on the roof. I mean, you think about it, it's kind of hard to articulate here, but you know, picture a helicopter up over the top of that screen. Anybody in this whole area can shoot at it. Whereas if you land it in here, you have the natural cover of the buildings around you. So if you want, in an urban environment, if you can air land, you want to do it. So we decided we're not going to extract with helicopters. We're going to extract with ground vehicles, which was the right answer. So we go in, the mission's going okay. A couple little things happened. We did have a Ranger fall from an aircraft, which, you know, to most people wouldn't be a little thing, but you know, in the conduct of an operation like that, you know, you just fix the problem and move on. About 40 minutes in, we lose our first aircraft, and it was Super 6-1.
And how many aircraft were there?
There were over 20 on the mission, yeah, and plus about 4 fixed-wing assets overhead. So, I mean, these are pretty complicated little missions. The first Blackhawk is shot down, and what they're doing is they're orbiting the target, not a 30 millimeter gun, but a gun with a high rate of fire. Is 7.62, but we could shoot 4,000 rounds a minute with it. So much more firepower than the troops on the ground have on their own. It's why they love close air support and why they like helo support, because you know we can bring some real firepower to the fight. So he's in tight, circling the target, and gets shot down by an RPG. So a few other things happened. We had a search and rescue bird get shot down. It went in to try to help that down crew. They get hit by an RPG. So that's when I got called in to replace that first aircraft. So when you get called in to replace somebody who just got shot down, I mean, it's not going to be a good day. You know, and we knew that going in, but we also know the guys on the ground, they need the support. They're being pummeled and they're surrounded, and they're not going to get out of there if we don't help them suppress the enemy fire. So we roll in. We made it around about 3 times when we got hit by an RPG, and the RPG hit. That's the tail rotor on the back there. The nose, if you're not familiar with helicopters, is this pointy end over here on the left. The tail rotor keeps you from spinning. The RPG hit just underneath that big round gearbox casing that you can see right there, and it essentially blew everything off from that point up. The tail rotor left the aircraft completely, which in a Blackhawk is not a good thing. We were at low altitude, low airspeed, spun violently. The only thing you can do in that situation is shut the engines off, which is not something you really want to do either, but you have to get control of the aircraft. So we did. Ray Frank, my co-pilot, actually did it because a Blackhawk, if you get up close enough to see, the engine control levers are up overhead. They're not on the controls. So I'm flying, he's getting the engines off, and somewhere during that process, we hit the ground. And the only thing I'm trying to do is keep from flipping upside down, which I was able to do somehow. And we hit on the gear, which is the only reason I'm still here. And you mentioned, you know, dust-off pilots from Vietnam. Not only, you know, did they set the culture for Army aviation, them and you know, all helo pilots in that war, but there's so many lessons learned from a technology perspective that if you parked the Huey here and you went side by side, you could talk about, you know, Blackhawk's got 2 engines. Blackhawk's got redundant flight controls. It's got redundant electrical systems, hydraulic systems. It's got self-sealing fuel lines. All of that stuff came out of lessons learned from Vietnam, things that, you know, would have saved lives had they been in place then, that are in these airframes today. Part of why I'm here, and it all works exactly as advertised.
So when you hit, how many? There were 4 of you on board at the time?
Yes.
So when you hit, who was injured? Anyone?
Oh, we were all injured very bad, yeah. I broke my, you know, even though those landing gear will strut or attenuate the crash, and the seat does the same thing. It has shock absorbers on it. we hit so hard that my right femur actually snapped off on the seat, just the pure G-forces of the impact. And then my vertebrae were crushed in my spine. Not the discs, but the actual bones themselves smashed into each other, and one compressed 30%, so the compression fracture is. So I had pretty serious injuries, and then obviously was unconscious for probably 5 minutes.
How quickly were you surrounded?
Well, onesie-twosie Somalis started coming in right away, but two Delta Force commandos, Randy Sugart and Gary Gordon, were overhead, and they saw that something had to be done or we're going to be lost, and they volunteered to go in. And I don't think you can ever fully appreciate the significance of that act. You're looking down, I often ask myself, if I was in their shoes, would I have done that? It's hard to, you don't know, there's no way to know. But they did, and not only did they volunteer, but they were told no initially. And then finally, one of them got on the radio directly to the command center and said, if you don't let us go in, these guys are gone. And they were given permission, they dropped off, and they came up alongside.
How did they get down?
Super 6-2, another Blackhawk, got as close as they could, and Gary and Randy maneuvered on the ground to finally get to our
side. Did they rope down? Or?
I think they jumped. I think they were able to get down to about 8 feet, and they jumped out.
Right. Now, they came to your protection, right?
Right.
And what happened then?
So they arrived on the side of the aircraft, and I knew them, so I'm thinking somehow there's a rescue force here, this is over. Not knowing it's just two guys, and that's the next reinforcements don't get there for 8 hours. So we were on our own for the long haul. Didn't know it. So I'm optimistic at this point. But we fought the enemy off for, I'd say, maybe 15 minutes. Gary Gordon goes down first. Randy then comes back around, and I think at that point, it's just me and Randy. I don't think anybody else is left. I've shot all my ammunition. He gives me Gary's weapon. He grabs the crew chief's weapons from the aircraft and goes back around, makes his last stand. They estimate, there's hundreds of Somalis here, so it's a matter of seconds before he just can't hold them all off. So he's killed, and then they overrun the site. Initially, pretty certain they're going to kill me because they're all out of control, angry and violent, and there's nothing you can do. I mean, you can't run, you can't hide, got no ammunition left. So I basically accepted my fate. So they descended on me and started to beat me to death. I mean, they broke my nose, my cheekbone, my eye socket. They were ripping all my gear off. And I had been to survival school. It's one thing, another lesson learned from Vietnam. We didn't historically send Army aviators or ground force to survival school prior to deploying to combat. But post-Vietnam, all of our special forces, of which I technically was qualified as, went to survival school. So I went to survival school where they teach you as much as they can what you're supposed to do in these situations. And they basically tell you, make the best of it. Don't make it any worse than it already is. So I essentially did my best to just roll with the punches and not antagonize them anymore. They realized I had value as a prisoner, stopped the madness, fired shots in the air, got control of the mob, and brought me into captivity.
And what happened in captivity?
Well, it's no picnic either. They teach us in survival school, it doesn't matter how hungry, tired, thirsty you are, evasion is way better than captivity. And it is, but captivity is better than death, I guess. So I was shot in captivity on the next day. They didn't care about my injuries. They were throwing me around like no litter, nothing, just throwing me in cars. My femur went out the backside of my leg at some point in that process. They did a video interrogation, which most people recognize when they see it. Aired on international television. But over time, doing some of the things they taught me in survival school, they began to be more I don't want to say kind, but not as hostile. And it got to the point where I don't think, even if their orders were to kill me in the event of a rescue attempt, I'm not sure they would have, because they just kind of got to know me, and developed almost a relationship with me, because, you spend 11 days with somebody 24/7. I guess they become human to you if they weren't in the beginning.
To what extent do you think they were already in the process of negotiating or trying to take advantage of the fact that you were captured?
Well, I don't really think they had a plan. It didn't seem like they had a plan initially. It seemed somewhat chaotic. And then when they made the video and it aired, obviously everybody knew that I was in captivity. But then the president sent the former ambassador, a gentleman named Robert Oakley, who the Somalis really...
President of the United States.
The president of the U.S. sent Robert Oakley to Somalia. And the Somalis really liked Robert Oakley. I've always said, if we had 1,000 Robert Oakleys out there in the world, we wouldn't have half the trouble we have, because he was a great statesman, he was a straight shooter, they trusted him, and he met with them, and he said, you got two choices. And I heard him tell this story to me more than once. He said, I told him you could keep him in captivity, or you can let him go. If you keep him, sooner or later we're going to figure out where he is, and we're going to come rescue him. And when we do, we're coming with everything we got. And there was, AC-130s and fighters and carrier battle group all had been brought in to put this bonfire out now. And he had credibility, so when he said that, the Somalis said, I think the best course of action is let him go. And within 48 hours, they let me go.
Wow.
Thanks. And I don't know if we're going to circle back, but Randy Sugart and Gary Gordon were posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, and I just want to make sure that gets into the conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that goes back to what you described about the decision that they made in, countering their commanders and said, no, we're going. Jim, back to you in Afghanistan. You've covered from Vietnam to Afghanistan. What was your mission over Afghanistan? What were you flying?
Well, at that point in time, I was already retired from the military, and I got a phone call one day, and they asked me if I would be willing to volunteer to go fly MC-12Rs, which is your King Air 350 turboprop, and fly reconnaissance. And I was actually attached to the 101st Airborne, so I actually did make it to the Army.
I told you.
Yeah, best was last.
Made your day, right?
Yeah, that was it. And but our mission was highly classified, obviously. Most of the time I worked with a SEAL or Delta Force, working all the equipment in the back that was very sensitive. And our mission was to recon and basically identify and locate guys that were being sought after. And we pretty well covered all of Afghanistan. My last 10 missions there was all up on the northeastern border in the Hakeem area, which is a very bad area. All of Afghanistan was a bad area. And my last 10 missions, like I said, were there, and the data that we were gathering was being sent. And when I got home, about 2 weeks after I got home, they announced that they had taken out 24 of the top Taliban leaders, and it was exactly where I was.
Wow.
So, but that was it. It was reconnaissance.
Going back to Vietnam, when you were flying those missions in the Bird Dog, I mentioned in the film Laos and Cambodia, but we weren't in Laos and Cambodia, were we?
No, sir.
That's right. Michael, looking back over your military career, what are your reflections?
I think the people that you work with, you're not going to hear a different answer from anybody that's ever been in uniform. Yeah, they're great machines, and it's a great mission, and there's a lot of elements to it that you have fond memories of, but it's the people, no question.
Jim?
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one thing I think I miss the most, and Michael's probably share this, is I miss the camaraderie of the squadron and the guys that you fly side by side with. They're like your brothers.
And by the way, after we finish our part of the program here, and in a few minutes with a walk around the airplanes, Michael's going to be in the bookstore to sign copies of his In the Company of Heroes book. So he'll be there just a little bit later. Questions from the floor? Questions? Anybody? Thinking? Anybody?
There we go.
Yes, sir.
I can hear it. He's asking about what about the movie Blackhawk Down? Most common question, by the way, if no one was going to ask a question, that's the one I would throw out. I say it's accurate enough. It's not perfect, but if you watch the movie, it gives you a good sense of what actually happened. The biggest deviation is the combined characters. So sometimes you'll see one character in the movie doing something that actually happened, but it was actually that guy over there. And the reason they do that is they can't develop 25 characters in a feature film. They got to focus on a handful. So they take the actions of several and put them into one person, and that person becomes a superhero, and everybody else is, honorable mention. But that's just the way the movie making business is. Yeah.
Any other questions? Questions? Yeah, we got one. Good.
DroneScapes.
Jim, what were your dates in 211?
I was there from June of 1968, and I rotated home in September of 69.
Any other questions? Sam Bass, our colleague here. We got one over here. We'll get it.
No matter if you could go back and change anything, would you?
What would you change if you could go back and change anything in your career?
One of the, and it's a very long story that I won't bore you with, but one of the names on the side of that airplane is Lieutenant Jim Reese, who was a very dear friend of mine. And he was a hooch mate. His bunk was next to mine. And Jim had a few libations the night before. And anyway, long story short, I went down to ops and said I want to take Reese's mission and he can fly mine later. And I was just getting up when Jim woke up and he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, I'm gonna fly your mission. You go ahead and get some sleep." I said, "The weather's really lousy anyway." And he said, "No, I'll get my, I'll fly my mission." And I said, "Well, you dummy, just go back to sleep. I've already got it all set up." And well, anyway, he got up and got dressed. I said, "Well, I'll at least have breakfast with you." And I went down and had breakfast with him. And I was scheduled to relieve him a little later. Anyway, long story short, I took off early to try and relieve him, and I couldn't find him, and he had been shot down and killed, and I guess probably out of my entire career, I wish that I had tried harder not to get him to fly that mission.
Yeah, right. Michael, any thoughts on the same subject?
Well, if you're talking about things you can control, I would say no. If you're talking about things you can't control, then obviously I would change the fact that, some folks didn't come home. That would be the thing that I would change. But I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat. It's amazing stuff. And changed who I am, and I would absolutely, unhesitatingly do it all again.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'd go back right now.
If there's any spirit, and there are many spirits here at EAA, this seems to be the predominant one of people who have decided it's important to use their lives to protect our freedoms, make our country better, and like you just heard, they would go back and do it again. So Gentlemen, thank you both very much.
Thank you, Dave.
Welcome.
And now Sam Bass with Paul Wood, who owns this A4, and Jim and Michael are going to talk about their aircraft as well.
So we can start out with Jim. Jim, let's start with your airplane because this is the furthest one away. And just tell me a little bit about the specs on the airplane.
Well, the Bird Dog, it's obviously a reconnaissance aircraft. It's slow. It's very slow. But it has a 213 horsepower Continental engine in it. It has about, on a good day, about 4.5 hours endurance. It's unarmed, although we carried Willie Pete rockets to mark our targets with, and actually flew with the windows open so we could hear them shooting at us. And then I'd shoot back with an AK-47 and then throw hand grenades out the window at them, which surprised a lot of North Vietnamese. And it's a good, solid airplane. It flies well once you get it in the air. The biggest boo-boo about this airplane, or the biggest challenge about this airplane, is landing it. It only weighs about 2,400 pounds gross weight, and so it sometimes can kind of get away from you. And it has a history of being ground loopable, which means the airplane kind of turns around on you, and that's about it. It's a very dependable airplane. You only cruise about, if you see 120, that's a good day. And other than that, lands about 70 miles an hour, takes off at about 50. And other than that, that's a Bird Dog.
Well, you mentioned that you had a 6-month tour because there were so many losses. How many airplanes did you figure you lost in the Vietnamese war in Southeast Asia?
Our squadron alone lost 6 aircraft, 6 Bird Dogs.
And there's almost 500 total lost.
Total over 500, counting the Air Force and the Army Bird Dogs.
Okay, now you mentioned the hard points on there. That you really didn't, other than the AK-47, that was the only thing you had that you could shoot back with, right?
That was it, yes, sir.
Now, were they kind of reluctant to shoot at you because they knew that if you saw where they were shooting, you were going to sick the big boys down on them, right?
Yes, sir. They knew that we had friends in high places, and they would only open up on us, like you said, if they knew that we had spotted them, and then they'd do everything they could to bring us down.
Now, you didn't fly into Ravens, but you had some interconnection with the Ravens. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
The Ravens were an amazing bunch of guys. They were on the Air Force called the Steve Canyon program, and it was all, super secret in Laos. And I had a couple of really good buddies.
We weren't in Laos, were we?
No, sir, we weren't. I had a couple of good buddies that were Ravens, and when I was flying the A4, I flew a number of missions over there where the Ravens were our our facts.
Okay, now the significance of your paint scheme on here.
This aircraft is identical to the one that I flew in Vietnam. It's in the same markings as my squadron, VMO 6, Marine Observation Squadron 6. And 41 is actually the tail number of one of the airplanes that I actually flew. And it kind of corresponds, our call sign was Fingerprint, and I was Fingerprint 41.
Well, let me ask you this. Of course, you've got all this vast experience in the different services. What does it mean to you when you fly this airplane to these air shows and the veterans come up and they look at this thing and they're very nostalgic about it?
It is a wonderful thing to see the veterans come up and they say, you know what, this airplane saved my bacon. And either that or I have young people come up that want to know, well, what did you do with this airplane? And they don't really understand. But it still is a reminder of the sacrifices that were made. And I think that's important. Like Paul has the A4, and Michael has the Blackhawk and the Bird Dog and all of the Warbirds that are here. That, it's just freedom ain't free, folks. And I don't care what anybody says. It's a price that has to be paid. And a lot of people are forgetting that.
Well, thank you for your information on this one here. And this is Paul's airplane here, and this is Paul Wood. And Paul is the founder of the Warbird Heritage Foundation in Waukegan, Wisconsin. He flies the F-86, the A-4, L-39, and the T-2 Buckeye of jets. He flies some other airplanes also. And this is his airplane. And I'd like for both of you to stand here. Get Jim over here also, because we'll talk about Jim flying it in combat. And tell us a little bit about your airplanes for the specifications on it.
Well, sure. The Douglas A4 was originally designed to take over the duties of the Douglas A1 Sky Raider, which was a carrier-based ground attack airplane. And the designer of the airplane was a guy by the name of Ed Heinemann. And so his idea was to design a very light, very nimble airplane that could be launched off carriers and have a predominant role in ground attack and drop bombs and fire rockets on ground attack targets. And it ended up being a phenomenal airplane. It had lots of nicknames: the Bantam Bomber, the Scooter, and Heinemann's Hot Rod. And it's a testament to the maneuverability of the airplane that it got all these nicknames. I think it is supposed to have dropped more bombs in North Vietnam than any Navy carrier-based airplane in the course of the war. Is that right? That's true. Yeah. So.
And also understand that there was only one of these that was lost in air-to-air conflict. Isn't that correct? During the Vietnam War.
Well, they lost a lot of them. I think they lost 350 or 60 of them.
Yeah, but I think that was the only one that was
ground fire.
Yeah, it was all ground fire. Okay. Now, how many of these were built?
Just under 3,000, I think, 2,962.
Well, how many are you still flying now?
In civilian hands, there are 2 single-seaters, and then there, I think, are 4 TA-4s in civilian hands. Then there are some government contractors that have A-4s that are still doing red air support out of Nellis or training JTACs and things like that, but they're on DoD contracts. So civilian owners, there's only just a handful.
Now this is in Navy livery, but the Marines also flew this airplane, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So now how many squadrons did you have of Marines? Do you remember?
The Marine Corps had about, probably at the time, 10 squadrons.
Okay. How about the armament on it?
Well, it had, I think 3 hard points, but you probably tell a little bit more about the armaments, I think, than I could.
Well, the Charlie model and the Bravo models had 3 hard points on it. The Echo model that I flew in Vietnam had 5. And most of the time, depending on the missions we were fragged for, you'd carry 500-pound bombs, which could either be a snake eye, which is a retard bomb that gives you time to get separation from the explosion. It's delivered at a very high rate of speed at a very low altitude, much more precise than dropping dumb bomb. It's a dumb bomb.
Right.
Or you'd fly the 500-pounders with a Slicks, or we'd carry Zuni rockets or napalm. And we had the 20-millimeter cannons.
And it would carry almost half the load of the B-17 would in the Second World War.
It actually carry more than the B-17.
More than a B-17?
Yeah, it'd carry about twice as much as a B-17.
Okay, good. So that, I had heard that before, but somebody said half, and I thought, well, that's a little strange.
No, it was about twice the amount.
now tell me about, this could be used also for a tanker. And it's kind of amazing that a little airplane like this can be a tanker.
Yeah, I think they put a buddy store on the centerline pylon, right? And so if they needed a tank, they could send someone up with, I don't know how large the tank was.
About 375 gallons, and it had a drogue system, which is, how the Navy Marines, we refueled with the, like the probe there.
Right.
And, yeah, we had tankers that would... go up and refuel birds coming back. Most of the time in Vietnam, we had KC-130s as tanker aircraft that we go plug into.
All right, Paul, now, this is in the Navy livery. Tell me the significance of this particular paint scheme and Lieutenant Schwartz's name is on the side.
Sure, absolutely. Well, as we talked about earlier, the A4 was a ground attack airplane, and it was never really originally designed for any air-to-air combat, although in later versions they used a lot The A4 is a lot in air-to-air. But at the time, Lieutenant Commander T.R. Schwartz was flying off the Bonhomme Richard, and he was in Yankee Station, and he was part of what's called an Iron Hand mission, which was flak suppression in front of a major strike. And he was loaded up with 5-inch Zuni rockets under the rails. And interestingly, he had no 20-millimeter ammunition because he was restricted on weight. So his job was to go in and find flak sites, roll in on them, take the flak sites out ahead of the main strike force, and then come back home. And he didn't have any bullets because he wanted to save weight for takeoff. So he was rolling in on his first flak site, and his wingman said, "Hey, TR, you got MiGs left 7 o'clock." And so he rolled off his target and came around behind the MiGs and fired off all his 5-inch Zuni unguided rockets and shot down a MiG. And so he's credited with the only air-to-air kill by an A4 in all of Vietnam. And so we put, I mean, it was just, these are dumb rockets that just go like that. They're meant to be unguided air to ground, and he actually got lucky and hit one, and so he's got the only kill air to air in Vietnam. So we're honoring him with his paint scheme.
But I'll ask you the same question I asked Jim. What does it mean to you to bring this airplane to these air shows and let these veterans see this airplane? And many times it's the first time they've seen it since they've they're out of combat.
Yeah, well, our museum has about 12 airplanes right now, the A4 being one of them, and our whole objective is to fly these airplanes and take them to air shows so that people who maybe did not serve in the military can not only see them, but hear them and smell them and see the smoke and hear the sounds and watch how fast they are and that sort of thing. And it's just our way of honoring the veterans who served and the heroes, both men and women in the military that flew and maintained these things to just keep our country free. And I think that's something that I want to do and all the people affiliated with our museum want to do. And we're very active about it. And it's a way to pay tribute to these great heroes. So.
Well, Jim, we really Paul, we really appreciate what you're doing for the Warbird community here, and we really appreciate you bringing your airplane. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Now let's go over there and talk to Michael and let Michael tell us about this helicopter, which I don't know anything at all about. Michael, tell us a little bit about the specifications and what was it designed for originally?
So,
a lot of memories with this airplane.
It should be on.
Still on? Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So this particular Blackhawk is a UH-60 Mike model, which is the newest one that the Army has fielded. The original Blackhawk, which goes back to the late 70s, was actually developed to replace the Huey. Now, I know a lot of us have a close relationship with the Huey, and rightfully so. It's an iconic aircraft. But it's been around for a while, and the Blackhawk replaced it in the Army for the assault and general utility role. That's what the UH stands for.
Okay, and you said they took a lot of lessons from Vietnam about redundancy and that sort of thing. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Could you get into that just a little bit?
Sure. So you can see from where you sit that there's 2 engines, so that's the first difference. There are 2 twin-engine Hueys, but most of them out there in the world are single-engine, so that's obviously an improvement. This thing's got, as I mentioned earlier, 2 hydraulic systems. It's got 2 electrical systems. It's got the crash attenuation of the landing gear. If I could remember my operator's manual, I would know exactly the feet per second that this will attenuate, but I don't remember. But you can hit pretty hard, and the landing gear will absorb the impact. It has self-sealing fuel lines. One of the major contributors to loss of life in the Vietnam era design was post-crash fires. You got people who are hurt, they can't get out of the bird, and the aircraft catches on fire. These aircraft are designed, the fuel lines break away, there's no fuel spillage. So when I regain consciousness, it's like somebody shut the aircraft down because the fuel lines all broke off, but the fuel didn't leak anywhere. So that one feature saved my life right there. So all those things come out of lessons learned. You got ballistic fuel tanks in this aircraft. What else you got? Obviously, some of the more recent design changes. This particular version has a digital moving map. It has integrated communications, some additional things that are more I would say enhancements for the task of flying the thing, not moving the sticks, but getting where you need to go. But in terms of the real kind of nuts and bolts, big improvements, I think I hit the highlights. It obviously it's faster, carries more weight, What's the max sling on these now? 8,000 or 10,000? 9,000. So you can put 9,000 pounds on the hook. A Huey, I think, was 4. So, huge improvements there. And that's all driven by ground force requirements. When the Huey was flying, you're hauling a Jeep around. With this thing, you're hauling a Humvee around, which is pushing $8,000 with stuff in it. So you've got to improve your air capability to support changes that occur with the ground force.
Now, what kind of armament do you have on this thing?
So the normal Blackhawk, again, it was designed as a utility helicopter, but it is a multi-role helicopter if you want to use it that way. So an assault Blackhawk will have door guns mounted here that the crew chief or door gunner will utilize during infiltrations and exfiltrations or whenever other times are needed. I had the very good fortune to be in special operations where we had the latitude to do some other stuff. So going all the way back to the late 80s, we armed ours into an attack helicopter configuration. So we modified the minigun mounts to where they were fixed forward. So we end up with a gun that is pointing forward, basically right here, one on each side, and each of those fires up to 4,000 rounds at 7.62. We put 30 millimeters on wings. These hard points here, you can mount wings. We put the same gun that's on the Apache. The Apache has a nose 30 millimeter. Right. We put 30 millimeters on the wings. The beauty of this is we could put 2 of them. So we could put a 30 on each side and the same magazine that the Apache has inside feeding them. I don't remember. I think it's 1,100 rounds per magazine. Not as big as that A10 30 millimeter. That 30 millimeter in an A10 is a giant round. But ballistically, it's a 30 millimeter round. We also put Hellfire missiles on it. So you could put, if you wanted to, 16 Hellfire missiles on this thing. In fact, I personally fired the first Hellfire off a Blackhawk out in Nevada back in the late 80s. Again, there's just so many things you can do with it. We put rocket pods on it. Rocket pods have 19 shots each. You got 4 stations, so you're talking 4 19-shot rocket pods if you want to, or any of those combinations in between. Usually we would go 30 on one side, rocket pod on the other side, and then the 2 miniguns fixed forward for attack helicopter configuration.
Now, when you went on a mission, how long would you be up?
So the other thing that we did is added internal auxiliary tanks. So this aircraft's probably got about 2 hours and 20 minutes of endurance at normal operating speed and weight. We put a whole nother set of fuel tanks inside to basically double that. So we could go 4 hours and 20 if we wanted to. We actually had a configuration where there were 6 of them in there, and you could fly up to maybe 8, 9 hours without refueling. But that's all you're doing is hauling gas. At that point, you're not hauling anything else.
Now, with all of these guns and the rockets that you had on there in the special forces, were you firing all the guns, or did you have somebody, the co-pilot or whatever?
No, we're firing them all
on the right side, didn't you?
Either
right
one.
seat?
You could sit left seat or right seat. So we're doing the flying and the shooting.
Okay.
And then the other thing, you're talking about fuel. We put refuel probes on the front of ours. It's not. It looks just like that on the end, but it's much bigger and longer because we got to get out beyond the radius of these rotor blades. So in a Blackhawk, the refuel probe actually extends. It sits in a fixed position where it's probably about, 4 or 6 feet sticking out. And then when you're ready to use it, it extends another, probably 6 feet to get out near the end of the rotor blades. And then we follow C-130s because...
With the Drogan probe?
Correct. Because only the C-130 is slow enough to get to speed where we can keep up with it. You can't do it off a KC-135 or a KC-10.
And I imagine with the weather bad, that's kind of dicey, isn't it?
It's actually diciest on a nice sunny afternoon, because what happens on nice sunny afternoons out there in airspace? Turbulence.
Yeah.
And you're trying to get in tight with this drogue that's doing this. It actually has to come in under the rotor blade tips. So you're trying to, and you can't just sneak up on it. You gotta strike it.
Right.
And on those sunny afternoons when it's really bumpy, it's very difficult to do it. It's a lot easier at night or when the weather's a little more stable.
Is there anything else you'd like to add on this, being I don't know anything about helicopters?
Well, I think the folks that fly it are going to tell you this is the greatest helicopter ever been built. I mean, these things have been around for 30 years now. They're probably going to be around for 30 more. It is an absolutely fantastic machine. It was designed right in the beginning. We've made incremental improvements all the way. They keep making this thing better. Guys that fly the Mike model, I'm sure would tell you, it's got some great enhancements that they really like over the earlier versions of the aircraft. And it's highly reliable. In the times that I was operational, I can think of maybe only 2 times when I went out there to launch and was not able to take off because of an aircraft malfunction. So, fantastic machine.
Michael, thank you. I admire you greatly.
We're talking about Blackhawk helicopters. A lot of people have been requesting for this video, honestly, along with the Huey helicopter, which, yes, I will be doing a review on in the future also. We all know of the Blackhawk helicopter. It has been around for a long time. It is featured in some fairly prominent movies, including, obviously, Black Hawk Down, which is literally one of my favorite war movies, and some of you will probably be in the comment section screaming at your keyboards, telling me that it's the worst movie ever, or whatever else you want to say, or maybe you agree with me, but the helicopter itself is still an iconic piece of American aviation, and today I would really like to thank everyone who has served on it, because this is quite a prominent aircraft for both medevac and CASEVAC, and I know for myself, I have known people who have been injured or, have unfortunately been lost in service being recovered by these aircraft in Afghanistan. So to those who have served on them or continue to serve on them, thank you so much. So we are talking about the UH-60 Blackhawk helicopter, which is a medium utility helicopter used for a wide variety of applications, including troop transport and medical evacuations. Since its introduction in 1979, the UH-60 has distinguished itself as being one of the great one-size-fits-all medium-lift helicopters, with its distribution reaching to almost every corner of the world. Sikorsky built the UH-60 Blackhawk to withstand brutal ground fire while keeping passengers and crew safe. According to the US Army, the Blackhawk was developed due to the Army's requirement in 1972 for a simple, robust, and reliable utility helicopter system to satisfy projected air mobile requirements around the world. The helicopter is named after Black Hawk, a war chief and leader of the Sauk tribe in midwestern United States. Black Hawk was an ally for the British Army during the War of 1812 and fought against the US Army to push settlers away from his people in the Sauk Territory. The Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawk has become a workhorse for the United States and other military forces the world over. Its capabilities have increased her roles to include special operations assignments, assault, medevac, command and control, and VIP transport duty, on top of her inherent troop transport normal capabilities. This includes delivering the President of the United States. The first production Black Hawk entered service in 1979 and remains a primary fixture for many of even any army today, 2 decades after its inception. Some 2,600 total Black Hawks have been delivered worldwide. The UH-60 Black Hawk is designed to endure the most extreme conditions and provides enhanced security for military operations. According to Sikorsky, safety features of the Black Hawk include ballistically tolerant rotor and drive systems, high mass components retained high crash conditioning, a anti-plow keel beam, reduced rollover potential with CEFS installed, energy absorbing landing gear up to 300 feet per second, crashworthy fuel cells of 65-foot drops, jettisonable cockpit doors and pop-out windows, along with wire strike protection. The Black Hawk was born out of the Sikorsky S-70 project designed by the United States Army Utility Tactical Transport Aircraft System, or UTAS, which was a specification that began in the latter part of the 1960s. The specification itself originated on the data collected from wartime use of the UH-1 Huey Iroquois helicopters pulling multiple duties across the war zone. Review of this experience brought about the need for a capable replacement system for the immediate future. This design specification also coincided with the development of the new General Electric turboshaft engine series designated as the T700. US Army feelers went out in 1972 with both Sikorsky and Boeing Vertol both answering the call. The Sikorsky design was chosen ahead of Boeing Vertol, the YUH-61 Alpha attempt, and the Sikorsky YUH-60 Alpha prototype, which achieved first flight on November 29, 1974. The production contract was handed to Sikorsky in late 1976 with first deliveries of the Blackhawk system beginning 2 years later. The Blackhawk was officially introduced into service in the middle of 1979 with the US Army 101st Airborne Division replacing the vulnerable UH-1 Hueys. Blackhawks have a distinct look about them, making them highly recognizable even when compared to her contemporaries. The forward portion of the fuselage contains seating positions for the pilot and co-pilot, collectively known as the flight crew, with windowed panels above, forward, below, and to the sides. Each crew position is afforded an entry-exit door. Directly behind the cockpit, though, is the cabin that allows for the seating of some 11 personnel, depending on the specific variant or version that has been given. It also has entry-exit doors made by two double-windowed sliding doors along the side of the aircraft. The General Electric series turboshaft engines sit atop either side of the middle fuselage with a 4-blade main rotor extending up between them. The undercarriage is completely fixed and features two main landing gears forward and a single tail wheel fitted on the fuselage area between the cabin and the extreme edge of the tail. Blackhawks have participated in pretty much all frontline conflicts spanning from Grenada to Afghanistan. They are even used in search and rescue helicopters in both commercial and military settings. Conventional versions of the UH-60 Blackhawk can transport up to 11 troops or carry 2,600 pounds of cargo internally. When equipped with a load sling, the UH-60 can lift and transport up to 9,000 pounds from the ground. Initial requirements for the UH-60 Blackhawk aircraft included modular design for easier repairs, high life cycle, and parts for fewer replacements, a troop transport and medical evacuation capability. It has since gone on to serve a number of different capacities though, including humanitarian aid and special operations insertion and extraction. A highly modified version of the UH-60 was even used in the acclaimed raid on Osama bin Laden's compound in 2011. The surviving tail rudder of the MH-60s indicated specialized stealth technology was used in its construction, and electronic warfare modules were added to help evade Pakistani radar contact. Several versions of the UH-60 Blackhawk are available for export from the United States. Foreign buyers are able to purchase specially designed versions for everything from commercial to the use of counterinsurgency or coin operations. Two ESSS or external store support systems can be equipped with air-to-surface missiles, electronic warfare pods, or even extra fuel storage. When configured for extra fuel, the UH-60 Blackhawk can fly up to 1,381 miles before even needing to refuel. Some models even have a refueling nozzle to allow it to have an in-flight refueling. Because this medium-lift helicopter has been in service since 1979, it has undergone some really big upgrades beginning in 1986. The improved UH-60L includes a hover IR suppression system, or HIRS, meant to mask or reduce the amount of heat kicking out of the engine. In December 2007, the United States Army ordered a new low-rate initial production, or LRIP, upgrade to turn the UH-60Ls into the UH-60Ms. In total, Sikorsky, under the contract to deliver 950 UH-60M aircraft, are to be delivered by 2025. This newest design feature is even more robust, with more efficient rotors and better infrared suppression. The infrared suppression is important for evading detection of surface-to-air missiles. The crew of the UH-60 generally consists of the two pilots, a crew chief, and door gunners. The door gunner and the crew chief may be positioned on either side of the UH-60 and may be equipped with anything ranging from the M240G to an advanced General Electric M134 7.62mm 6-barreled minigun, depending upon the mission requirements, of course. The cargo bay of the UH-60 may be equipped to carry up to the 11 combat troops fully configured in their infantry setup, or can be reconfigured to carry advanced electronic warfare equipment or even medical litters, basically stretchers. With a reinforced bottom to help deflect anti-aircraft fire and titanium-cored rotors to protect against flak and ground fire, the UH-60 is an ideal helicopter to move troops in and out of highly contested areas. Few helicopters are built to endure every possible situation that may arise. However, the UH-60 is definitely one of these, boasting a massive variety of features on the UH-60 base variant alone, let alone the vast array of variants that are created for special operations, pure transport, electronic warfare, or many other duties. Boasting an aerodynamic design overall and high top speed, the UH-60 has an amazing survivability rate. The aircraft is able to deter most modern threats today and even survive direct hits from ground fire. The UH-60 really does remain one of the backbones of US Army aviation squadrons and can often be seen in photographs flying in tight formations everywhere from Iraq to Afghanistan and beyond. Even the multiple variants of the Blackhawk are widely renowned for their efficiency despite being modified from a utilitarian design. There is also the S-70 Alpha Blackhawk helicopter, which is flown by a crew of 3, the pilot, the co-pilot, and the deck crew of 1 in the back of the cabin. The S-70 Alpha helicopter is equipped with a glass cockpit and digital avionics. In addition, S-70 customers may select a Digital Automated Flight Computer System, or AFCS, to simply give the workload to the pilot less and less. An electronic flight information system provides primary pilotage and navigation displays for aircrew. The S-70 Alpha also has some interesting weapons. It's qualified as a launch platform for the laser-guided Hellfire anti-armor missile. The Blackhawk can also carry 16 Hellfire missiles using external store supplies, and has a capacity of carrying 10,000 pounds worth of missiles, rockets, cannons, electronic countermeasure pods, or whatever else you want to accommodate on the side of it. The S-70 can also carry 2 50 caliber machine guns in the windows or parallel to the aircraft to fire at the ground. The US Army Blackhawks are normally fitted with the Goodrich AN AVR 2B laser threat warning systems. But, of course, all good things do come to an end, and as many of you who are watching this video are probably aware, the UH-60 is going to be replaced soon. The US Army has picked 2 winners which will face off to replace the UH-60 Blackhawk medium transport helicopter. The Sikorsky-Boeing SB-1 Defiant will square off against the Bell Textron V-280 Valor in the future long-range assault aircraft program. The winner will enter the US Army service with the first units equipped with the aircraft in 2030. The Blackhawk helicopter truly has been a proven, reliable aircraft for almost 40 years, and the design has been maxed out though. The Army wants faster, longer range replacements, and the service made clear that it had to have the achievement of being fast, revolutionary, and very good at vertical lift. The 2 competing aircraft reflect the Army's desire for new technology. It's a sad thing to hear, knowing that such a legacy helicopter is going to be taken out of service, but I can safely say that no matter what replaces it, it will probably still stay in service for many, many years to come elsewhere around the world. When we look at this helicopter, I always think of the US military. I know it's used around the world, but it is a staple workhorse of the US Army for sure. Of course, the Navy also use it in its own configuration across with, other corps of the military around the world. And I really do think it's just such an amazing piece of equipment. The fact that it can be so modular, updated, and upgraded to meet just about any challenge that whatever military is using it puts it up against is really, really impressive. I've never flew on a Blackhawk before. I would love to. I've been on the Chinook, I've been on the Lynx, I've been on a Gazelle, but not a Blackhawk. But as I did say before, this is a massive shout out, and this video is dedicated to those who have supported, operated, flew these aircraft. Really though, it does mean a lot to me knowing that you guys serve across these aircraft, because they have done such amazing things around the world, saving lives, protecting those who need it, medevacing and casevacing out those who are in danger, whether it be military members or civilian casualties. So thank you to everyone who has served on these aircraft.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.
The Sikorsky Blackhawk has been a reliable warhorse for the U.S. Armed Forces. For over 35 years, it has been leading the charge into hostile territory, from the deserts of Iraq to the mountains of Afghanistan. The rhythmic pulse of its blades are both a signal to wounded American men and women that help is on the way, and a warning to enemy forces that trouble is on the horizon. After decades of upgrades, they remain some of the most sophisticated aircraft in the world. But is it possible to create an even more advanced machine using today's technology? What if the world's rotorcraft manufacturers started with a blank sheet and reimagined the helicopter from the ground up? In